I think quite often when we find ourselves changing, when we find ourselves growing, when we find ourselves leaving certain parts and certain versions of ourselves behind, right? We come up against a whole lot of resistance from the world. We come up against resistance from our parents, from our family, from our friends, from people that knew us for so much of our lives, right? They mention how much we've changed. They mention how different we are. They mention how, they no longer recognize us, right? So on and so forth. And because of their opinions, because of their words, we find ourselves feeling guilty for changing. We find ourselves feeling guilty for no longer being the version of ourselves that they were used to. And oftentimes we find ourselves slipping back into the old version of ourselves, right? Oftentimes we find ourselves trying to play the role of the person that we no longer are, right? And because we're playing a role or we feel guilty for being, you know, for no longer being the person that we once were, oftentimes that can rob us of our happiness, that can rob us of our peace, that can rob us of our joy, right? Because when you are no longer a person that you once were, trying to play the role to appease people, trying to play a role so that people in your life can feel comfortable, is slowly going to cause you to suffer, right? And if you're currently experiencing this, or if you've experienced this in the past, you really need to know that you don't owe anyone. You don't owe absolutely anyone a version of yourself that you have already left behind. You don't owe your parents. You don't owe your family. You don't owe your friends. You don't owe the people who you grew up with. You don't owe absolutely anyone a version of yourself that you have already left behind. Absolutely anyone, right? There have been so many times in my own personal life in which, I found myself changing. I found myself letting go of certain versions of myself that caused me so much pain and suffering in the past, right? And quite often, the people who I knew, the people who were close to me, they would oftentimes mention how much I've changed, right? How much I'm different, how much they no longer recognize me, right? And I would feel this guilt, right? I would feel this guilt, this deep guilt. And I would find myself slipping back or trying to perform a version of myself which I no longer am, right? Just so that they can feel comfortable or just so that I can appease them, right? And I would often have to really catch myself. And I would have to say, well, hold up. Why am I slipping back into a version of myself that I have left behind so that they can feel comfortable, right? Why am I performing a version of myself which I no longer am just so that I can appease them? Why do I feel like I owe them a version of myself that I have already left behind, right? I really had to sit and ask myself that question, right? And there have been so many versions of myself which I have left behind for various reasons. So much of my pain and unhappiness and suffering in the past were attached to certain versions of myself which I had to leave behind so that I can move forward and grow and heal, right? So much of my people pleasing, so much of my insecurities, my low self-esteem, right? So much was attached to certain versions of myself that I had to leave behind. So if I were to go back or perform that version of myself, which I no longer am, just so that these people in my life could feel comfortable, or just so that I could appease them, then I would only perpetuate my own suffering. I would only rob myself of my newfound peace, my newfound joy, right? By trying to go back to a version of myself which I no longer am. And I had to recognize that I don't owe anyone a version of me that they have grown comfortable with. I have every right to change. I have every right to grow. I have every right to leave a version of myself which no longer serves me behind. I have every single right. And it is not my responsibility to make them feel comfortable. It is not my responsibility to uphold a version of myself that they can relate to. It is not my responsibility to appease them, right? And once you recognize that it is not your responsibility, you have to be comfortable with disappointing people. You have to be comfortable with disappointing your parents, comfortable with disappointing your friends, comfortable with disappointing the people who you have known for so much of your life, who are dear to you, right? You have to be comfortable with disappointing them. You truly have to. And if you have left a version of yourself in the past, you have left that version of yourself in the past for a reason, right? The past version of you, which was attached to insecurity, which was attached to people pleasing, right? Which was attached to a lack of boundaries, a lack of self love. If you've left a version of yourself behind, you left it behind for a reason, right? So often, the people closest to us, the people in our lives, they don't even know the battles we're fighting internally. They don't know the monsters that we're struggling with. They don't know the things that we've been battling with for so much of our lives, right? And once we make the decision to leave that version of ourselves behind, we did so for a reason. We did so because that version of ourselves was causing us a whole lot of pain, a whole lot of unhappiness, a whole lot of suffering. And so they have grown accustomed to a version of you that they're used to and comfortable with, right? And that is understandable. But they don't recognize that the version of you that they knew was genuinely unhappy on the inside. So on the surface, they expect you to remain the same person. They expect to they expect for you to uphold a version of yourself that they're comfortable with. But they truly don't know what that version of you was attached to and the things that haunted you, the struggles and the battles you were facing on the inside. They truly don't know, right? They don't know all of that. And that is why you truly have to be comfortable with disappointing people. The closest people to you, you have to be comfortable with disappointing them if you truly want to heal and grow and move forward in your life. right? You really have to. Because if you try to go back to a version of yourself which you have left behind, you are only going to pick up the old bricks, pick up the old burdens, pick up the old pains that you have left behind. And why would you go back to a version of yourself which no longer serves you? Just so that you can make people in your life feel comfortable or you can appease the people in your life, right? What sense does that make? And once you recognize that, you begin to realize that either you are going to constantly live your life trying to appease people, or you have to learn how to be comfortable with disappointing people so that you can truly move forward and grow in your life, right? But you don't owe anyone, absolutely anyone, a version of yourself that you have left behind. And you have every single right to change. Don't believe that you have to constantly remain a certain version of yourself, right? You have every right to change. And people treat change as if change is such a bad thing, right? Oftentimes people will demonize you for changing, right? And if you're changing for the worse, if you're becoming more insensitive and you're just becoming an asshole, right? That is understandable, right? But if you are changing for the better, if you are growing, if you are healing, if you are letting go of your people pleasing, right? If you are letting go of your need for validation, if you are letting go of the lack of boundaries which you once had and you're truly moving forward, right? Then you have every right to change. Don't think you have to constantly carry a dead version of yourself. Don't think you have to constantly carry your old scars or your old burdens, right? You don't have to carry them. At any moment you can choose to leave them behind. Any moment. When it comes down to life, you have to be willing to die every single day, right? You have to be willing to die every single year. You have to be willing to constantly shed your old skin when it comes down to life, right? And you have to be comfortable with being unrecognizable to the people in your life. Like I've told people in my life on so many different occasions, right? I've told them that if they can recognize me a year from now, if they can recognize me 5 years from now, right, or 10 years from now, then that means that there is something wrong. That means that I'm not changing. That means that I'm stagnant, right? If they can recognize me, right, then that means that I'm not growing. And that's an issue. So you have to be comfortable with being unrecognizable to the people that you love. You have to be comfortable with them learning the new you over and over again. You have to be comfortable with them getting accustomed to a new you over and over again. And if they can learn to love the new you, if they can learn to accept the new you, then those are the people that you want to surround yourself with. If every time you change, the people in your life, you know, they feel some sort of way, or if every time you change, you constantly come up against resistance from them and they cause you to feel guilty, right, for changing, then those aren't the people that you truly want to surround yourself with, right? Every single relationship that blossoms or is healthy in life constantly requires people to be comfortable or become comfortable with a new version of that person, right? Even when it comes on to romantic relationships, the people that you're with, your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, whatever, right? They have to be comfortable with a new version of you. They have to learn to love and accept a new version of you over and over again, right? And if it gets to a point in which they're no longer can tolerate, right, or be with the new version of you, then they have every right to leave. They have every right to end the relationship, right? But a genuine relationship requires people in your life to get comfortable with, to learn to accept, to learn to love a new version of you over and over again. Because if you're not growing in life, then you are remaining stagnant. And even stagnation is a fallacy because nothing stays the same in this world. So if you're not growing, then you're regressing. And when you're growing, you are going to be unrecognizable to the people in your life. And you have to be okay with that. You truly have to. But never let anyone make you feel guilty for changing. Never let anyone make you feel guilty for leaving certain versions of yourself behind, right? Never let anyone. And you have to understand that a lot of people in your life, they are going to feel some type of way whenever you're changing, right? Because a lot of people benefited from certain versions of yourself because certain versions of yourself, it was easy for them to exploit. It was easy for them to take advantage of certain versions of you, right? The versions of you that people please, the version of you that sought out validation, the version of you that had no boundaries. People are going to feel some type of way whenever you're changing because that is going to mean that they no longer can take advantage of you. They no longer can manipulate you, right? But you have to get comfortable with letting them or allowing them to be disappointed. You have to let them be disappointed. You truly have to let them. Because if you live your life trying to uphold a version of you which no longer serves you, just so that you can appease people, then you are constantly going to be unhappy. You are constantly going to hate yourself. You are constantly going to lack peace in your life, right? So oftentimes, most of the time, you have to learn how to disappoint people. And you have to learn how to let them be disappointed so that you can grow, so that you can move forward. And you have to know that you don't owe anyone, absolutely anyone. You don't owe your parents. You don't owe your family. You don't owe your friends. Heck, you don't even owe your significant other a version of yourself that you have already left behind. Because if you have left it behind, if you have left that old version of yourself behind, then you left it behind for a reason, right? And going back and trying to pick up old bricks, trying to carry old bricks, trying to carry old scars, right? Trying to hold on to old wounds. just so that people can feel comfortable and just so that you can appease the people in your life. If you try to do that, then you're constantly going to perpetuate your own suffering. And so you have to learn, right? You truly have to learn to disappoint people, right? Disappointing people is something, it's a skill. It's a skill that everyone has to master in this world, right? If you truly want to be the highest and the most authentic, the most free, the most loving, the most kind version of yourself in this world, you have to learn how to disappoint people. Or you have to learn how to let people be disappointed because it's not even you disappointing them, right? They're disappointing themselves by trying to hold on to a version of you that you've never promised them. You've never promised anyone that you are going to stay the same. So they are the ones who have disappointed themselves by getting too comfortable with a version of you that you didn't even promise them, right? It's their own expectation, it's their own projection that is causing them to be disappointed. So you have to let them dwell in their own disappointment if you truly want to grow, heal, and move forward in your life, right? You truly have to. So thank you guys for being here with me. Um, Thank you for sharing this beautiful space, this beautiful time with me. And I really hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys are taking care of yourselves, loving on yourselves, and giving yourself a bit of love every single day, like I always say. And like I said, get comfortable with disappointing people. And you have to learn, and you have to learn how to allow, I should say, the people in your life to be disappointed by you no longer being a version of yourself that you have left behind. Right? Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace and blessings.